everyone. Hello, 'tis I, Madame Askew, and I'm back for more sewing nonsense. Spoopy season sewing nonsense. I'm very excited. We're getting ready to move into our next underpinning or next garment in the autumnal underpinning madness that I have been working on. So that's very exciting. I hosted a poll on Patreon, and my wonderful Patreon subscribers on our next option, which is going to be the wonderful lobster tail bustle cage. I'm very, very pleased. I love this garment. I'm excited to get into it. Hello, Bess. Hello, Phyllis. Hello, my darlings. Thank you so much for joining tonight. It's wonderful to see you. Bess, congratulations on your new kitty. Hello, Anne. It's so good to see you as well. Hello, my darlings. Listen, the best thing I've clearly done for myself start streaming this directly onto YouTube as well as Twitch. Thank you for joining me on YouTube. If you are new around here and you have not done so, it helps me out a great deal if you like and follow our YouTube channel and our Twitch channel. It helps you get notifications that these things are happening, and it helps us cut through the noise on all of these platforms. So thank you very much. Hello. Oh my gosh. Selena. Oh my gosh. Hello. Oh, it's been so long. What a treat. What a treat. What a treasure. How delightful. Yes, I'm very excited about this garment. The poll was very close. It was decided by one single vote. So after this one, we're going to be doing the split draws. So currently I'm finishing, oh, pardon me. Currently I'm finishing up the last bits and pieces of my petticoat to go over the bustle cage. I'll be doing the last details in our sewing social on Sunday for Patreon subscribers. And so tonight, I'm going to be talking about this beauty, the lobster tail, or the imperial tournure, as it is called on truly Victorian, to be all fancy and French. But I just love the shape of this bustle cage. It's such a funny little garment, and the whole period of bustle fashion is kind of a fascinating era of 19th century European fashions or European inspired fashions, because of course people were inspired by these fashions all over the globe, but the bustle cage, bustles, all of this sort of originated in Europe and spread from there. And it spread sometimes through terrible mechanisms of imperialism and all of that colonialist nonsense, but also sometimes people like things. So it's a complicated history of fashion. But oh my gosh. So Selena says she's going to be doing the hand stitching on her fourth pair of split drawers tonight. That's excellent. Look, you need multiple pairs of these things, right? So that you can have the laundry capacity and still get by with your time traveling hijinks. And hello, Monsieur Gatto. Please have treats so you will be at ease. So anyway, I'm very pleased because bustles are, oops, pardon me, Monsieur just knocked a bunch of things over. So bustles are one of my favorite fashion statements. I really like the silhouette. I love the way it looks on me physically, so I keep coming back to it. And I'm just fascinated by the history of this fashion and this era. So for me, it's a real pleasure to work with. And I've done it quite a bit. I've made many bustle cages over my adventures as a time traveler. The last one I made, so beautiful. I really love it. is this wonderful rainbow situation. But there was a travesty with my last bustle that I'm still brokenhearted about. It shrank in the wash. So I had pre-washed everything, and I thought that I had done so sufficiently. And sadly, I guess I hadn't pre-washed it enough because or in hot enough water or what have you. And so it shrank when I went to wash it. So it got a bit small. And whilst it provides a little bit of lift, a little bit of support to my skirts, I actually find it to be too subtle. I want a big bustle and make big costumes. I'm a plus size person. I need a more emphatic bustle to have the effect on the silhouette that I want it to have. So I'm excited to make myself a new bustle cage that's going to be that bigger dimension and take up more space and create more volume under my skirts. So Selena asked which petticoat I made to go over the lobster. So foolishly, I have the pattern envelope in the other room, but I did the sort of bog standard petticoat from Truly Victorian that has 4 different eras of petticoat in the envelope. And I like that one because it's so versatile pattern, and you can make up so many different petticoats out of it. The difference is that I decided to adjust the pattern not only for my own personal size to make certain that it fits me appropriately in the waist and appropriately in the hips and all of that, but and also length. Length is actually my big challenge because I'm quite short. And so I always need to shorten my petticoats. Thank you. Phyllis has the number. It's TV170. Thank you, Phyllis. So instead of leaving it as is, I decided in my infinite wisdom, and I honestly, I stand by this decision, although it is filled with hubris. So I decided to cover the back of this petticoat with additional ruffles, like a waterfall cascade of ruffles down the back to create even more volume and support under my skirts. One of the things I'm finding is that as I make more and more elaborate time traveling ensembles, they weigh more. Those skirts are heavier, which means they need more support underneath to maintain that full, rounded, bustle shape that I want it to have. And so I'm building up more loft by adding additional ruffles to help support that shape. So it's a little bit like I took TV 170, our sort of bog standard petticoat that I love so much, and I married it to the grand bustle, which is a sort of early bustle shape that is covered in ruffles down the back. And what I did was I stole that idea of the ruffles and I've appending them to TV 170 without making the whole, early bustle cage shape. That particular pattern is a really good one. It does make a really nice bustle, but I find it terrible to pack. And also, it's a little bit more of that transitional phase of bustle. So coming out of the late 1860s, early 1870s, it's coming out of the hoop skirt era. So it's a little broader in the back. And I like to do the early 1880s inspired bustles, which protrude more in the back. And so I want more fullness in the back. I want it to have almost that shell-like lobster shell experience in the back. So I prefer this particular shape. But I do like the ruffles, so I just stole that idea of the ruffles and I'm adding them to the petticoat. I will be writing up a little bit more about that experience, but I have been doing these sessions on Patreon and videoing them and then posting the videos later. Yes, that is the one I'm referring to. Selena asks, am I referring to the TV 101 petticoat with bustle? That's the one. Thank you very much, Selena. I really appreciate everyone going in and finding the right numbers and names of these things because A, I left the one pattern in the other room. B, I have to go hunting for the second pattern. So I don't have the numbers memorized. So thank you all very much for pulling those up because I know that people want to know specifically the pattern so they can go looking at it and decide for themselves if they would like to make up this particular pattern or not, or whether they want to look for something similar elsewhere. I do come back to Truly Victorian fairly often. They have such a broad range of sizes. So I go from, size 2, size 6, something like that, all the way up to size 26, 28. And in some cases, some of the newer patterns, they've gone up even past that. Now, they size their things by letter rather than number because they are working with your measurements and they want to sort of divorce themselves from this modern sizing schema, which I really appreciate because it takes out some of the, toxic nonsense that's associated with sizes and focuses more on fit. And fit is all about measurement. And I am also very keen on fit. I think fit is the singular most important thing to fixate on, if you will, as a sewist who wants to elevate yourself to the next level of sewing. Yes. Selena says, I love their patterns and the way they do their fitting of the front separate from the back. I agree with you entirely. I think it's a really genius approach. It's helped me get extremely good fit on all of my fitted bodices and things, which has been so wonderful. There are a few other options for patterns for 19th century fashion, but they are limited. So you can find some things from Black Snail patterns. I always like to share about them because their patterns are quite lovely, but they are mostly Regency. They do have some Victoriana, but their focus is Regency. They started with Regency patterns. They have the most variety in that era, Regency or Georgian, depending on how you like to use your terminology. And so those are quite lovely. They have a wonderful range of sizes, but they don't have as many options for those of us who like to do the latter part of the 19th century. There are things like past patterns and sewing history. They also have some lovely, lovely patterns. Their size range is more limited, so that's something that I really consider. I also really like Laughing Moon Mercantile. They've been re-releasing some patterns. Their business model, I think, has changed a little bit because they've been around a long time. I don't know if the owners are simply just kind of getting tired or nearing retirement, but increasingly their things are mostly digital downloads. But they do have some wonderful Victoriana patterns, and they have a pretty good size range as well. Occasionally you can find things from Folkwear, but they also have a sort of limited range of 19th century patterns. What they do have is fantastic size range in their re-released patterns. They've really committed to making their patterns more inclusive. So that said, here we are with Truly Victorian. They fit the bill for those of us who are plus size sewers who want to time travel to the 19th century. They are, for me, they've just been the best option outside of drafting my own patterns, which is not a skill I'm very strong in. So I like ready-made patterns that I then adjust for my fit. So there's a long way to say that's why I come back to Truly Victorian and why I tend to recommend them. So, and this particular pattern, our lobster tail bustle cage, or imperial tournure, is a very classic bustle shape, but it also looks really intimidating if you've never made it before. It has all of these boning channels in which you're going to be putting hoop steels or some sort of boning to support and maintain this shape. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I recommend doing some kind of metal boning. So there's lots of ways to bone a garment. I make corsets, and I'm very, very keen on boning that is not going to melt or deform or lose its shape. So I'm really careful with what I use. Now, there's the German synthetic whalebone, which is a kind of polymer that has a high melt point, so it's not going to start to deform just from your body heat, just from wearing it, but it will sort of softly mold to your body, which is very like whalebone would have done. So that's an excellent option for corsetry, but it's not heavy enough for your bustle cage, and also it's very expensive for something like this, although with the cost of metal bits it might be more competitive than it used to be price wise. I haven't compared recently. I don't like to use heavy duty zip ties for this. That's another option that sometimes people use for things like corsetry. I've had mixed success with that in corsetry personally. That's a whole other story. But in terms of the bustle cage, it's too lightweight. And so when you are standing up from sitting in your bustle cage, if you have made your bustle with a rigid structure that's too lightweight, it won't fall back down. It'll just stay folded up like a little accordion that doesn't want to open up. And so the weight of those bones, the weight of the steels in your bustle actually help not only maintain the shape of the garment, this wonderful bulbous shape over your posterior, but the weight helps pull it back down into the right shape, because this is a great garment. It collapses when you sit, it collapses flat for packing. All of this makes it really wonderful garment, great for travel, excellent for moving through our modern world, excellent for moving through your time traveling adventures. Because of this collapsibility, it allows you to sit and to maneuver into different spaces more comfortably. But if you don't have that weight of those metal bones, it's not going to fall back open. It's not going to maintain the right shape. Ask me how I know. I definitely experimented in the past with the heavy duty zip ties to see if they would work, in part because it can be rather difficult, a bit challenging to get hoop steels properly. Hoop steels used to be more available, but a few years ago there was like a shortage that happened, and the rumor was that it was because of all of the sort of sudden influx of costume dramas that were happening that required hoops and bustles and all of these things, and so they just soaked up all of the hoop steels. But at this point, I'm wondering if the factory that made them just stopped. So now what a lot of people use is like a heavy duty uh, spring steel boning that is very much akin to what I use for corsetry. It's just like the slightly heavier duty version. But you can also use your sorts of like corsetry boning. You will have to order it by the roll and cut and tip your own, because these are not coming in lengths that are normally available as pre-cut lengths. So it used to be that Truly Victorian actually sold a kit with the pre-cut hoop steels for your bustle cage. That was really helpful. It was wonderful. Honestly, you could just order the kit. It was a very competitive price. It was very fair. You didn't have to worry about everything was cut and ready to go for the size of bustle you were planning to make. Voila, beautiful. But they had to stop doing that because of the expense of metal right now. Metal prices were already going up during the pandemic because of shipping issues and shipping delays. But honestly, the tariffs are also having an impact on these sorts of things. So for a lot of businesses, it's just no longer feasible for them to do. So I buy my hoop steels, my corsetry steel by the sort of bulk spiral of steel from Richard the Thread. I'm certain there's a word for it, but it escapes me right now. But I get this like 10 yards of it or 50 yards of steel, something absurd like that. And then I can cut and tip my own to be the right length for the bustle cage. So it's a little bit of an adventure cutting and tipping your own bones. If you've taken one of my corset classes, we've gotten into it a bit. I will see if I can like set up to do some kind of demo with doing that. There are some very excellent tools that allow you to do this without too much pain and suffering, but the tools make all the difference. Oh my gosh, Phyllis still has one of those kits. Phyllis, that's excellent. That is going to make your life much easier for making your bustle, which is wonderful. You will not have to do any of that nonsense of cutting and tipping your own bones, which is, look, it's not the end of the world, but it is like 7 or 8 bones or something like that. And so it's time. It's like a time consuming process. And if you don't have the right tools, then you have to invest in those tools, which is another expense. Hello, Cheshire. It's wonderful to see you, my friend. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, so tonight we're sort of talking about the getting started on our lobster tail bustle. And Cheshire, I suspect you are going to be amused by this whole experience because it is such a weird little garment. I love it, but it is kind of a weird creature. And it's evocative of a lobster tail, which is why we refer to it that way. The fancy pants word for it is tournure, which basically, I don't know if that's actually, I'm not going to say what that basically is. I was about to say it's related to turn, but I don't know that for a fact. That could be a false cognate. So it doesn't matter, but it's a wild little garment. This goes under your skirts and it helps them look bigger. It makes your posterior look larger. And I like to say it helps you create sort of hypnotic sway as you walk, very powerful as a person in a bustle dress. Anne says she used the kit for her bustle cage as well. Yeah, no, look, it is wonderful. That kit was so fantastic. And whilst I entirely understand why Truly Victorian had to make the decision to stop carrying the kits, I missed the convenience because it wasn't very expensive and it saved a lot of time and effort. However, for this one, I'm going to have to cut and tip my own bones. So, pas du problème. I have the tools. I know how to do it. I do have to order more steel from Richard the Thread. So that's going to be one of my projects this week, to get sorted and to have that coming in transit to me, so I have time to do some cutting and tipping. Cheshire says Google says it translates to turn. All right. So maybe Google and I are in agreement. Sometimes my French does not fail me. So the other thing about this garment that looks like it's a little bit of frippery and maybe it's not a necessary element. Sweet Mother of Buddha. Apparently, I have decided that I have to do nothing but make ruffles for the next few weeks because it's the ruffle. The ruffle on this is an essential part of the garment. Remember, I was talking about the weight, or if you didn't come in at the beginning, I've been talking about the weight of this back portion of the bustle and how important it is to have it weigh enough that it will spring back, fall back into shape. And this ruffle is part of the weight. It has just enough additional weight that it really helps finish putting that into position. It also cuts the harsh line of the bottom of your bustle cage so that it doesn't create this like sharp demarcation that's visible through your skirts, where the bustle cage just sort of breaks off and now your skirts are like falling in under that bustle cage. So you want that ruffle. It's very important. It's also a wonderful place to do some decorative nonsense and add some frippery and some like fanciness to your bustle cage. So we have a great question here. Selena asks, do I use the 1/4 inch continuous corset boning for this? Yes, that is what I'm going to be using. So in the past, Richard the Thread has had also 1/2 inch wide boning, which would be a little bit more in line with the old hoop steel that I haven't seen in more than 7 years, to be honest. But that requires more specialty tools to cut because it is thicker. It's a little bit harder and heftier to cut. You can also sometimes find heavy duty 1/4 inch corset boning. And that is sometimes marketed now as hoop steels. So you can find that at corsetmaking.com, which a corset supply, another corset supply company that is on the East Coast versus the West Coast. So Richard the Thread, with whom I normally work, is on the West Coast, and I have a long-standing relationship with them. So I normally go there, and I find the prices they usually wash out. So like they might be slightly more expensive for some things at corsetmaking.com versus Richard the Thread and vice versa. So when I put everything together in my cart, my cost is essentially the same. So I don't feel like I need to go to corsetmaking.com to save money. I'm very happy with my prices at Richard the Thread. And I love Lois and her family who own Richard the Thread. They're always extremely helpful. So these are, yes, Cheshire, the bustle cage definitely makes twerking so much easier and also so much more obvious and bouncy. So that's lovely. More people who are interested in twerking should really embrace the bustle. Alicia says she still has to cut her boning, but she has to decide what to use for the bias tape. we may talk about that. We'll come back to that. So Phyllis, this is a great question. Phyllis asks, would I explain how I wear the layers? Petticoat, bustle, another petticoat, outer skirt? Question. All right. I someday perhaps will remember to get a good video of the undressing adventure and like put it together and make that available. So you just have a reference. But basically, this is from the skin outward. I put on my chemise, my corset, and my split drawers. So some people like their split drawers over the chemise and corset so that those are on the inside. Some people, I tend to be a split drawers, then chemise, then corset. Because I want the chemise to fall over my split drawers. I don't tuck it into the waist of my split drawers, which is another option. Then I put on my bustle cage, and then I put on at least one petticoat. And if my petticoat is full enough and has enough ruffles, I may only need the one petticoat. But you do need at least one petticoat because of like it makes everything softer, smoother, it supports your silhouette, it makes it look a little nicer. And then I put on my foundation skirt, which is sort of like a intermediate between petticoat and all the frith and furbelows of the overskirt. These days, my foundation skirts can be quite elaborate. If you look at the dragon costume, for instance, all of the scales are on my foundation skirt. All of the trim and the nonsense is on that foundation skirt. Oh my gosh, really? So sorry, I was just distracted by what Bess posted. So Bess says, corset making supply has the double wire hoop steel in stock for $5 a yard. Oh, that might be worth it. Honestly, that is a delightful bit of news. I'll have to measure and see how much I need, and decide whether or not the cost is worth it, because the double wire hoop steel really is very nice. It provides a wonderful support to your bustle cage and is just a little bit heftier than the continuous like quarter-inch bones. So thank you, Bess, for sharing that. So right, back to the layers. So after the foundation skirt, then it's usually an overskirt that goes on top of that. And the way they were often done, the foundation skirt and the overskirt historically, and the way I do them is that they are meant to be paired together and they create a sort of cohesive single look. So it looks like a really complicated single skirt made out of all of these complex layers, but they're usually made out of two garments that are paired together. And then the last thing to go on is my bodice with all of that. So I kind of, that is the layering and the build up to get to that final silhouette. So sometimes you do need additional petticoats, especially as you're getting into these like more bell-like silhouettes, so the 1850s, 1860s, getting into the late 1880s and 1890s, you're almost certainly going to need additional petticoats to create this broader skirt situation. For my bustle skirts, as long as I have a really good petticoat that has enough of a ruffle at the hem and is made out of fabric that has enough substance to it. And I'm not talking like I need something like denim or anything like that, but my petticoats are not a place where I'm going to use cotton voile, for instance. I do want a cotton or a linen that is sort of like a little bit heftier than that, lighter than canvas or duck or twill. One of the sort of more medium to heavyweight quilting cottons works very well for petticoats in my experience. So I like this. So Alicia says, I tend to add a light built-in petticoat to my underskirts if the fabric I'm using is very soft, lightweight. I still use a petticoat over the bustle, but it reduces the bulk. Yeah, so one of the things I do very frequently in my foundation skirts is that I flatline them, first of all. And so they've got that sort of double layer of fabric, immediately helps. And then very frequently, I take some petticoat netting and I build it into the back of my skirt as a sort of like demi petticoat. It's only in the back panel. Sometimes I run it the entire length of the back panel of the skirt to the sort of start of any ruffle or pleat at the base of the skirt. And sometimes I will just do a double layer of that petticoat netting as a sort of flat lining in that back panel. And it gives increasing loft to that back panel without adding much bulk or weight, because petticoat netting is very, very light. So let's see here. Yes. So Bess says, do I ever starch my petticoats? She's also heard good things about cotton organdy as a petticoat fabric, as it's crisp and holds its shape. She hasn't tried it herself. Okay. Yes. I have done this thing. I have done it. I must say, all right, I was talking about I normally use like this sort of toothsome cotton for my petticoats. And I avoid things like voile because it's going to be too lightweight. Organdy is a different story. It is still very lightweight. So it's the sort of thing where it might depend on the kind of skirt situation I have. But once you starch it, suddenly it's a whole different beast. So I have one petticoat I made that way, and it is corded and it is incredible. It washes like a dream. It is so like lightweight, but it really provides a lot of shape and support. It holds up pretty well to quite a bit of abuse and weight. The cording certainly helps in that case, but the most critical thing is the starching. The challenge is doing the starching. You have to starch it every time you launder it, after you've laundered it, which is not the end of the world as long as you have the wherewithal to do it. But you need to use dip starch rather than spray starch. And my supply, the dip starch I like to use, is no longer made. I haven't found one that I like. And that's because I prefer something unscented. And most of the dip starches I've seen recently, or the last time I checked, which has been a couple of years, all had a fragrance to them. And I can't wear things that are heavily scented. If you have been near me, you may or may not notice I never wear perfume. I avoid scented things. It's not because I don't like them. It's because of allergies. I don't have a super strong reaction. I do have a little reaction, but I know too many people who have a strong reaction. And since I'm out and about and socializing with people, I just avoid scents and perfumes, but especially in my laundry because those fragrances, those scents tend to be quite strong. And so I haven't restarched it in a while. I haven't done the thing, but it is incredible. So if you have the wherewithal, I I encourage you to give it a try. And you can get a really nice cotton organdy from Dharma Trading at a really good price. And usually they have it in white, which is infinitely dyeable. Sometimes they have it in black. So, but I recommend it. It's lovely. All right. So there's some more. Um, oh, thank you, Anne. Yes. Well, I try on the allergy front. But also I'm very aware of how terrible an effect it can have on people who have strong reaction to those things. Um, all right. So, hello, Christina. Hello, Danaeus. It's wonderful to see you dropping in. I'm happy you could drop in for a minute. Selena asks about petticoat netting. Is it different from tulle and where do I get it? Yes, it is stiffer than tulle. And I wish I had some like convenient. Um, I'm never There are certain things I never have on hand and then we talk about them and I always think, why didn't I grab an example? But the truth is I never expect that our conversation will go this way. So petticoat netting is just a bit stiffer is the big thing, but it's not like, if you remember a few years ago, there's a big fad for creating like scrubbies and that sort of thing for the kitchen or for, the bathroom, for shower time, what have you. And you could get this like very thick net to use to make those. And it was very stiff and very scratchy. Petticoat net is not that stiff and scratchy, but it is stiffer and has more body than tulle. And so when you crunch it, it springs back to shape immediately, which is wonderful because it maintains its loft and maintains its volume while still also like having a kind of softness to it. Is not going to be super abrasive on your skin. So I used to sometimes be able to find it at Joann's, obviously not an option anymore. Phyllis introduced me to tutu.com and they have some petticoat net that in colors, it's lovely, and their prices are very, very good. Sometimes you can find it at Mood Fabric. I think I've also found it at Denver Fabrics, but I think that tutu.com has the best selection and the best price for your petticoat netting. So that's where I will be getting mine. Yes, Anne says it's the scratchy netting in wedding dress petticoats. Yes, it is scratchier than tulle. It's not as abrasive as the kind of netting that they were marketing for creating scrubby sponge things. I don't even know what to call those. They're not something I use. Although I know that for people who like them, they're wonderful. So I'm not like opposed to them. I just don't have experience with them. So yes, petticoat netting I think is one of the most wonderful little secret tools in my arsenal to help create volume and loft. When I was working on the dragon, because the skirts were so heavy and the whole dress was so heavy, I actually made essentially a fake rump out of petticoat netting that I built into the overskirt because it was just so it was so flat. It needed more shape and more volume. All right. Bess says, in the shower, they are called loofahs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bess. Alicia says Fabricland also carries it. They have physical stores and you can order it online. They have stores both in Canada and the US. Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you. So, anyway, petticoat netting is wonderful. It's an excellent tool. I tend to have layers of fabric between me and the netting directly, but I love the way it can add volume and shape and support to your skirts. Honestly, all of these historical silhouettes, all of them, are dependent on your underpinnings. So if you're looking at, you know, the 1950s and the new look, that wonderful fit and flare, and you build a dress for yourself and you've fitted it and it looks so lovely, then you put it on and you notice it's a bit flat, it's just not quite doing the thing. It needs petticoats. Historically in the 1950s they'd wear multiple petticoats, not just one, multiple of those like very frothy can style petticoats to get that fullness of shape. They also wore a sort of modern incarnation of a corset underneath. Sometimes that was built into the bodice of the frocks. That's a whole other story, plus girdles and everything else. Hate a girdle. It is the underpinning where I'm like, I'll wear it if I have to, but I dislike it intensely. So it's all about those underpinnings. And when you get into something like the 19th century, where you have these very complex silhouettes, the underpinnings are everything. And it is absolutely this story of like building up the support so that the shape actually is as elevated, is as full, is, you know, as prominent as you wish it to be. So Alicia says, oh, sorry, I meant to type here and in Canada, but brain no brain good now. That's all right. I knew what you meant. It's all good in the hood, as they say. I followed you. So let's talk a little bit about my upcoming iteration of the bustle cage. I am doing this whole like kind of dark academia vibe, and so my main fabric for my bustle cage is going to be this fantastic spooky print that's covered in skulls and potion bottles and planchettes and death's heads moths and, you know, fripperies and furbelows and Ouija boards and all sorts of lovely nonsense. It's a very complex, wonderful, you know, busy print. I really like it. It's a grey and black, which seems to be the theme for a lot of these underpinnings. I'm doing all of this grey and black fabric with a touch of green, which was not something I intended necessarily. It just happened to be something I had a lot of in my stash. So most of this fabric is coming from my stash. Now, sadly, this is fabric that is from the now defunct Joann's, and I have a limited amount of it, so I must cut with care. My intention is to at least make the bustle cage out of this. I may also make the Grand Arbiter's pantaloons, his drawers out of this, or I might make his out of the floral print. I haven't decided yet. I will decide when I get there, probably. But it's a very nice cotton. It's been laundered. It's been pressed, although it needs to be pressed again. If I want more of it, I probably won't be able to get more of it. But I would have to go to things like eBay or Etsy and see if anyone is selling it. In this case, I got this length of fabric from a friend who was purging her stash. So it's the wonderful world of like sewists sharing from stash to stash. I'm very grateful because I think it's really fun. So this is going to be the shell of the bustle cage, and then I'm pairing it with this wild striped fabric, which is also cotton. It's black stripe on a gray background. And so we're going to use this for the front panels and possibly for the ruffle, depending on how much I have left once I've cut out those front panels. So I'm excited. Everything that is not visible, I'm going to be making out of a standard black cotton because I'm trying to stretch my really cute prints as far as I can. So I'm not going to use them in any places they're not visible. So Alicia mentioned earlier that she was like trying to decide what she was going to be making her bias tape out of for her boning channels for this. Now, you might be tempted to use boning channel tape. It's an option, but this is designed so that you can open that channel up and remove your bones so that you can launder the garment. And if you use channel tape, you're probably not going to be able to do that. So it's an option, but it's not an option I recommend. So I normally just create a bias tape out of a solid fabric. So in this case, I'm going to be making it out of black cotton. And sometimes in the past, I've just used ready-made bias tape that's a poly cotton blend from like Coats and Clark or Clover or what have you. And it works perfectly fine. It's very solid. It's a little bit lighter weight often than what I make on my own, and so I want something a little bit heftier this time. And also the ready-made bias tape doesn't have quite as much stretch to it as my homemade bias tape, so I tend to like my own homemade bias tape, and I make it a lot, so I'm very used to making bias tape. So my plan for this one is just to make a nice bias tape out of cotton. But if you're like, Madam, I just want to make this petticoat. I just want to make this bustle cage. I don't want to be like faffing about with making bias tape. You can use the ready-made bias tape. It works totally fine. And also, hello, Scone Mistress, who is taking a small break from Hobbitlandia while she cleans the kitchen. She was home all day today with the sick Hobbit. Oh no, I'm sorry the Hobbit is sick. I hope she feels better soon. I suppose 'tis the season of like little ailments making the rounds amongst small children. So fingers crossed it's something mild and that it passes quickly. All right. So anyway, that's my fabric. Depending on what I do, how much fabric I have, I might trim it out with this beautiful black lace, which I am obsessed with. I love this lace. I might save this lace for something else. I'm starting to run out of it, but I might just decide, it's meant to be used and use it to finish out the ruffle on this because it's so pretty. And I think this will look nice with a little bit of lace on the bottom. Oh, all right. Yes. So we're going to actually talk about this a little bit. Alicia says, that is true, but because she's tall, she needs to make hers longer. If I add channels myself, I don't have to redraft the pattern, just mess about with the placement of the channels. Absolutely true. So I think for what it's worth, Alicia, I think you can space your channels out more. So if you are a tall person, I'm a short person, so Alicia and I have different challenges. But if you're a tall person and you want more length to your bustle cage, and in fact you probably need it because you need it to fill up a certain amount of your skirts to support them, then I think you can just increase the distance between each of these lower rungs of your bones, and probably just add length here at the bottom to like pull it, make it a bit longer for yourself. I wouldn't muck about with these upper ones, these top three. I just leave those alone, and then make the space, increase it between these. What do you want, like an additional 3 to 5 inches? I don't see any problem with adding an inch of length in between each of these rungs. There's probably like an upward limit, but you've got quite a bit of play before you have to worry about it. This does bring me to the absolute hubris that I am going to be engaging in. However, oh, yes, let's see here. Alicia says, basically, I will take the lazy way most of the time. Same, girl, same. I mean, about some things, clearly not about others. As we've all seen, I can be incredibly ridiculous and full of hubris and nonsense about certain aspects of a costume. But for things like this kind of alteration, this kind of adjustment, I want to find the most pragmatic, the most straightforward way to do it that requires the least labor possible. About where should the bottom of the bustle be? That is a good question. I like mine to end about mid-calf. So, and the ruffle probably goes at not quite to the top of my ankles, but like the sort of bottom rung is going to come at least to the widest part of my calf muscle, maybe a little bit below that, so it's past the knees. And then the ruffle is like, gosh, that ruffle is really deep. I think it's like 8 inches deep. So I don't want the ruffle to show below the hems of my skirt. So I don't usually want it to go much past the thickness of my calf for the bottom rung of my bustle cage. But I do want it to be that long. Now, if you want to do a narrow ruffle, you could make the body of your bustle cage longer, because I have seen them quite long. I've seen some examples of them where they went almost all the way down to the ankles of the wearer. They're very, very long. But mine, I think, is like, I tend to have it sort of that mid-calf range plus the ruffle, so the full length is coming to just like maybe a couple of inches above my ankles. So for some of my short skirts, which I haven't done in a while, then I have in the past made that ruffle a little bit shorter, so that it doesn't peek through the hem. Usually my petticoats are the thing that I have the most trouble with, like making sure they're not too long. And as long as my petticoat, as I would say, as long as my bustle cage is not longer than my petticoat, I'm doing fine. So, but yeah, I like that last rung be at that point of my leg, because then it's really supporting the fullness of the skirt still, and then that ruffle sort of softens the break of the wire. Now, if you do the TV 101, that is that combined bustle and petticoat, it's kind of an interesting pattern, because the metal, the bulwark, the sort of support structure for your bustle is mostly at the top of that petticoat, so it doesn't go that far down your body, but you have all of these ruffles and all of this, like, fabric gathered into the back that's falling over those bones and then filling out the space underneath. And so it gives the point that as long as you have enough fabric fullness under your wires to support your skirts, you're okay. You don't necessarily need to go super, super long. Um, oh my gosh, yes. All right. Cheshire says, if I beg nicely, will you make a terminology dictionary? I can't Google fast enough. Yes, I will. And in fact, Cheshire, if you send me the terms that you're like, what in the world does that mean? I will have an idea of the things I need to define, and I will start putting together a little, dictionary of terms to make available. I'm very happy to do it. It's just, I don't always catch myself using obscure terminology. I'm very, honestly, I mean this in full sincerity. I'm not being cheeky. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I'm very sincere. I really appreciate when you stop me and you're like, what does that mean? I want to be stopped. I want to explain things. Especially on Tuesday nights. It's sort of like the whole point is to explain things. The other thing is, I am obsessed with words and I love dictionaries. So I'm actually very happy to do something like this. But I may not know what terms you need to find. So just let me know. Message me or what have you. Maybe I'll ask for feedback in Discord. What terms do you think should go into a little lexicon for people getting into time travel sewing? All right. The tea went down the wrong way. All right. So let me see if I can not die of choking. So I've got my fabric, I've got my pattern. I know what size I need in a bustle because I've made them for myself. Yeah, the tea tried to betray me. So the thing I've decided, however, is that I'm never satisfied with the size of the bustle cage. And so since I have to already cut all of my bones and tip all of this nonsense, and since I'm very, this is an important part, I am very, very comfortable with this pattern and I've made it a lot. So adjusting the pattern is not intimidating to me. And I understand the adjustments I'm making and what they mean for me and my garments. Very important. I would not do this thing that I'm about to talk about if it's my first time making this pattern. So just to specify, if you've never made a bustle cage before, you've never made this particular pattern before, don't make the adjustment I'm about to talk about. All right? But I want more fullness. I have been very unhappy with the amount of fullness I've been getting. I'm on some sort of obsessive path towards greater fullness. And I think because I'm quite broad, plus size person, that I just need a little bit more shape, a little bit more fullness in my bustle cage. And so I've decided to increase this curve of my bustle cage just a little bit. I'm going to add probably an I might add 2 inches total, which does not sound like that much. I may just add an inch. I will look at the pattern and decide. But I'm just adding the tiniest bit, but because it is 3-dimensional and a curve, even adding an inch adds quite a bit of volume. And so I would need longer bones and all of this stuff to make up for that. But since I am cutting and tipping my own bones, it is not a problem for me to make this adjustment. If I were still using a ready-made kit, I would need to stay within the bounds of the pattern. So What so Anne asked, what junk am I putting in my trunk? Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, in this case, I don't know if I'm putting anything inside the petticoat, the bustle cage rather. Although I have, in the long ago past, made one of these bustle cages, these lobster tail bustle cages, where there was no fabric in between the wires, the hoop steels. I combined them instead with sort of a cotton twill tape in between. And then it was all open inside like an actual cage. And the person I made it for hung fake bats and lights inside of it. It looked absolutely stunning. She wore it outside her garment. It wasn't like an internal bustle. It didn't have skirts over the top of it. It had a little bit of like frippery here at the top that created a little bit of a decorative sort of ceiling for all of her bats that were hanging down inside her bustle cage. It was one of my favorite things I made as a commission. That was probably a decade ago now. It turned out really smashing. So Cheshire says, I think it's petticoats that go in your trunk or split pants go in your bustle. Yes. So the split pants, split drawers go under your bustle. The bustle goes in the trunk of your petticoat, if you will, and the overall confection is covered by these massive foundation skirts, right? So anyway, I probably am not, I don't know if I'm going to do that alteration tonight. But let's look a little bit at some of these pattern pieces. We'll see how we get on. Okay. Here we are. All right. So Alicia has to lengthen hers always. I have to shorten mine a little bit usually, either at the ruffle or someplace in the body of the lobster tail. And it just depends. This is where my being 5'3" and Alicia, I think you're like 5'9" or 10. You're a lot taller than me. It really makes a difference. I have stumpy legs and Alicia has legs that are meant for fencing. So we just have different challenges. That was a very negative way to talk about my legs, but sometimes I resent being a short person. I have a tall person's personality. So you can see this is the pattern, and it has quite a bit of volume here. I just want a little bit more. So yeah, when I'm looking at this, I'm like, I think even just adding a ½ inch is going to be nice. And what I'm going to do is just go in and manually grade this up to be a little bit fuller along the curve. I could alternatively go in here and add length here to the inner seam if I wished to. The big thing is I am noticing as I'm wearing this garment, and I've worn different iterations of this bustle a lot, it's just not quite giving me the fullness that I want for my skirts. So Scone Mistress says her old roommate, who is 5'3", said that she has presence, so no one sees her as short. Yeah, no, people are sometimes surprised when they meet me in person the first time that I am a short person. So I appreciate that my personality really carries me, as it were. All right. Move you here. Grab out my pieces that I need. So the bustle cage has not that many pieces to it, actually. Has the ruffle on the bottom. Piece one, it has this like wild back portion, which is pattern piece number 2. We've got these like side panels that wrap around to the front of your body that hold the bustle cage in place. Piece 3, it has an internal pad that holds everything together. That's piece 4, and then it has a waistband, piece 5. It's a very simple pattern with very few pieces to it, which is lovely, because the complicated thing here is actually sewing in your boning channels and then trusting the process, as it were, because there's a bit of fabric origami to putting this together. Pulling out all of my pieces. Yes, so my much abused, very much abused back panel that goes inside the bustle cage. I'm still taller than Phyllis. That's true. Phyllis, I was also startled. You are another person who's short and has a big presence. So I never expected that I was taller than you. That was, what a surprise, a delightful treat to meet you in person, but also a surprise to find out that not only are we both short, but I'm the taller one. So Cheshire asks, is the fullness the upper part or to push out the bottom of the skirt? Oh, all right. So let's see if I can describe this for you. So this upper part, the curved portion, goes right over where your natural posterior is, and it creates kind of some padding, a little bit of a bubble where your posterior is. Now, one of my favorite things when talking to people about bustles is that people who have not done a lot of time travel fashion will quip, oh, I don't need a bustle. I have plenty of junk in my trunk already. No, you don't. This is a weird shape. Human bodies don't typically make this shape. So this is artificial. It is all artifice. Even if you have a very full posterior, you do scads of squats, you have a beautifully shaped peach, your bubble is very full, it's still not shaped like this. So this creates this curve over your natural posterior, and then you get all of this fullness down here as you go down towards the hem of the bustle cage. And this fullness helps support the broader expanse of the skirt. So the curve up here creates the loft of your bustle skirt, the fullness down here as you're going towards the hems of your skirts helps support the fullness of your skirts, because they're all sort of like a little bit A-shaped, right? They're all fuller at the bottom than they are at the waist to create that wonderful hourglass figure. We all need a bustle, says Scone Mistress. I agree entirely. So, and that Cheshire, to get back to it, the ruffle at the bottom of the bustle cage, this bit, these last few rungs of the metal, that helps the full bottom of your skirts maintain their fullness. It also, look, it obscures your ankles. No one knows where they are. And we all know that ankles are the most scandalous part of the human body. So it's very important to obscure those ankles in the 19th century. So we need all of that camouflage for Ankle Town, as it were. So I hope that answers your question. All right. that is in the wrong envelope. It's all right. Oh, right. Okay. I put a lot of things in this envelope and I am questioning why and how and where they came from. Okay. So one of the things I do for myself when I am working on this pattern so that I can easily find my marks for the boning channels is that I go in and I mark them with a really dark Sharpie marker so that it shows through whatever I am using to go in and do those marks, whether it is tracing paper or what have you. Usually I'm using tracing paper and a tracing wheel for that, but I do different things depending on the fabric. Okay, I think that's everything I need. Yes. All right. Good. Excellent. Yes, it's an all over fluff, Cheshire. It's an all over fluff and no ankles. We have no ankles. Ankles are strictly forbidden. No one has ever had an ankle ever. We hover. We're like little hovering humans who float over the plane of the earth. We don't walk. We have no ankles. We have no feet. That would be too scandalous for words. So we have to do with the sort of like hovering ruffle situation. All right, so those are the main sort of ins and outs of doing this particular project in terms of getting started. It looks like I'm going to start diving in to some fabric cutting, which is exciting. So I'm pretty sure I have plenty of this fabric for doing my bustle cage. I've got a few yards of it. Honestly, this is another thing about this pattern. It does not require that much fabric. It's less than 3 yards of fabric for the whole thing, but if you can find 60-inch wide fabric, you're looking at about 2 yards of fabric. So it's a very economical pattern in that regard. The most expensive portion, the thing that requires the most financial commitment, is the boning, because boning is always expensive. I'm certain there's a quip in there somewhere. So anyway, let me just pull out my fabric, throw it on the floor. So I'm going to start with this fabric because I'm a little concerned about cutting it. So let's talk about it. It makes me a little dizzy to look at it. I apologize. So the fabric on the straight of the grain has this beautiful bias stripe situation going on that is very dizzying. And so I'm going to cut my front panels out of this fabric, and I kind of want to make certain that my diagonals are mirrored. So I'm going to cut it out one layer at a time. Normally I would cut this out folded over, but because I'm not certain how that will look, I want to do one layer at a time to make certain that the pattern is going in the direction I want it. So it's mirrored for maximum dizziness effect. Basically, I want to hypnotize people when I start taking my underpinnings off and we get to the bustle cage. I would like to drive people slightly batty, as it were. Yeah, and Cheshire says, boning is always costly one way or another. That's true. So I'm just going to, I cleared off the table and I did not do enough clearing, I think. So I'm going to spread this fabric out. I'm going to look at how the pattern piece lays out on the fabric, and then we're going to go from there. No. All right. So this is great. So Cheshire says, so the stripy bits will be visible when all the layers are on. No, they'll only be visible when I start taking off my frocks. So Cheshire, you have not been to one of these. I haven't done one in a couple of years, actually, but the Grand Arbiter and I sometimes do this panel presentation called Undressing the Victorian Lady and Unwrapping the Victorian Gentleman. And so we take off all of our clothes, our outer clothes, down to our underpinnings, and we talk about the underpinnings. Scone Mistress asks, are you doing an underpinning panel at Wild West Con? We haven't done it in a while. We should do that. What a nice idea. We haven't done that in a while. It'd be really fun. And I'm going to have this beautiful underpinning set. So yeah, maybe I'll propose that we do that this year at Wild West Con, since it's been, gosh, I don't think we've done it at Wild West Con since before the pandemic. So yes, it's a very fun time. I love doing this panel presentation. I love sharing the insights of how things go together. So Phyllis's question, for instance, it is so important to talk about the order of the layers and how they go together, and you know, how you are going to stuff everything, and make sure all the bits are covered as they need to be covered. And we try not to do that every year at the same convention, because I feel like how often do you need to see me take off my clothes? I could be wrong on that front, but anyway, so yes, this is not visible until I start taking off my frocks, but then it will be visible. All right. So this is a nice 45-inch wide cotton. I have 2 yards of it. Should be plenty. And thank you, Cheshire says, every single time. Thank you. So I should have plenty of this, but because I want to fussy cut and have it mirror each other, I need to be careful with my position and also take stock of how the fabric is coming out. So this is why I'm going to be cutting it one layer at a time. And it could be the case that if I folded it and just cut it mirrored as usual, it would work out, but I'm not certain. So I'm going to be careful. Oops. The cats are helping. So helpful. They love this game. All right, kitties. Okay. And I am starting with these panels in part because they are not something I'm going to be altering. So that makes it a little bit easier for me to get started here without concern that I'm going to get distracted and make a terrible mistake whilst we're live. Yes. So I'm very hippie. I have a nice little waist, but I have a lot of hip action. And so I need plenty of hip coverage, and I require the largest size in this pattern for my hip area. And then I have to adjust down for my waist. So that makes it very easy for me in terms of like cutting things out, because I just cut the largest size of the pattern. Really, you're so nice and so pressed and so smooth, and you just do not want to cooperate at all. This fabric is being very persnickety. So it's all right, but I'm having a terrible time like straightening this fabric out so that I can get it prepared for the cutting and laying out and all of that. I'm certain we've all been there with fabric that does not want to cooperate. And maybe it's because it's sort of hypnotizing me as I work. Okay. Pardon me. This is a good question. Can I clear out the fabric instead? Well, Cheshire, I may need to at this rate, because it does not want to be straight, that's for certain. It is being very uncooperative. All right, let's try this again. We're going to all get taller together. Or I'm going to get briefly shorter and then taller. All right, let's try this, shall we? Okay. All right, let's see if this works. So I don't understand the physics of it, but sometimes I just need to stand up in order to have my full range of motion with my arms. Sweet baby Tesla. This fabric is really dizzying just to look at it as I'm like trying to get smoothed out and ready to go for cutting. It just made me a little dizzy. All right. Oh, yes. There's plenty of fabric here. But working with it is a challenge. Oh my gosh. Okay. I know this has been a lot of me faffing about trying to get this fabric sorted. So let me show you what this nonsense looks like. So here's the fabric. And if I take this off, it's just so, there's something about this diagonal stripe that is very dizzying. It helps when I put the pattern paper on the top here. It sort of interrupts the pattern. I do want to watch for my grain line here. So there's a little line on my pattern that says grain line in this case. You get them on most patterns. That's very important when it says to cut it lined up that way. Make certain you do, unless you're very comfortable. Oh my gosh, Anne, I just saw your comment. Could I turn it over and do it from the back? I could, although I wish to make certain I'm lining it up with the pattern. So I'm probably going to have to cut it right side up at least once. Is it making anyone else dizzy, or is it just me? Not really on the grain. Huh. Let's check. All right. So normally I don't have to be this persnickety about the grain, but I'm finding it very tricky to see my grain line and everything else. All right. Good night, my dear Scone Mistress. It was wonderful having you here tonight. Cheshire says every small wiggle of this fabric makes it seem very wavy. Yes, it feels that way when I'm cutting it or looking at it, to be honest. I'm sort of like feel a little dizzy just looking at it. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter, and this is the rotary cutter I was talking about on Saturday during our crafternoon. I really love these. I want to keep my fingers out of the way of that blade because it's quite sharp. I cut from my dominant side to my non-dominant side. This is an ambidextrous style cutter, so it works for right or left-handed people. Sometimes I have to switch. I'm moving away from myself. So you're sort of moving from a strength position to a less strong direction when you're cutting. Hello, Monsieur Gatto. Are you going to help? Going to help? I do have to go on the entire other side of the table in order to cut that bit over there because I have longish enough arms for this, but I can't quite reach across here conveniently. So Monsieur Gatto is going to help. Hello, Monsieur. Yes, you're so good. You're totally in the way, but you're very darling. Watch out, watch out. All right, so cut out one little piece. So let's look at what we need to do in order to have this mirrored. Cake is very happy to help. Hello, my darling. Okay. So now then, I think I'm going to do a little marking here. I can find my, here we go. It's very easy to lose track of what's the waist side and what's the hem direction. So I like to put a bit of a mark for myself. This is the top edge. I'm just putting a pin up here to help me remember this is the top edge. Monsieur, I love you so much, and you are absolutely finding the best way to be in the way. All right, really, hello. All right, there you go. So it turns out, it worked out really well that I was doing this one side at a time, because if I had tried to fit this in, well, it might fit. Oh, no. Okay. So I want my stripes to be going up towards the top for both sides. And if I were to mirror this like so, it would be going down on the other side. So I'm glad I didn't try and do that. But now let's see if I that. Him. Let's see, my darlings. Can I make this work? Or will my dreams be crushed? Okay. Cake, really? Ow. Not helpful. You're very cute. No. All right. Okay. Ow. Not helpful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I wonder if it's possible. Ah. Ah. If I do it like that, if I turn it 90 degrees, then I get my, no, for heaven's sake, sir. Monsieur, you are being such a brat. Look, have a bribe, please. Thank you. Cake. You delightful little muppet. Okay, are we good? All right. Okay, so now that works. That works a treat. So I'm just taking my fabric, which I can fortunately really see the pattern from the wrong side, the way it's printed. And I'm lining it up now with the stripes. I'll be cutting cross grain rather than straight of grain, which is fine because it's not on the bias, which is what I'm trying not to add bias that I don't intend to have. bias being the diagonal of the fabric, which is stretchy. That's an unexpected turn of events, but I'm happy I found a solution. I'm not trying to do perfect pattern matching or anything like that here. I just want the diagonal to be mirrored so that it has a nice look when it wraps around my body. Normally, I would pull out the pattern piece. I would not just cut the fabric like so, but to be honest, given this weird pattern matching situation thing I'm doing, it's really easier to use the fabric as my guide. I want to be careful not to cut into the fabric I already cut. It's very dodgy what I'm doing. All right, I'm going to have to go on to the other side of the table again. Beth says, looks like the stripe should about follow the angle of the front edge when the pattern piece is upside down for the other side. I thought that was going to work too, but was it quite lining up right? Maybe I needed to upside down and swap it around. But anyway, this 90-degree situation is totally working. So I'm delighted. All right. My front panels are cut. And I'm happy I had the extra fabric to do some nonsense. It likely means that I have enough of the striped fabric to do my ruffle if I wish to do the ruffle out of this. And now you see how they mirror each other, which is exactly what I wanted. So I'm very pleased with that, how that turned out. I'm also going to mark the top edge here, so I know where my top of the panel is. Makes a little sort of chevron around my body, but I think it looks nicer to be mirrored in this way than if it was just all going with the stripe going in the same diagonal and then coming over here and it was the same way. I think it would look a little bit odd, not in a pleasant way of odd, but like a, oh, there was a mistake that was made. So there we go. Cut and ready. All right. Let's see if there are any other comments, questions, thoughts. So that was like a little bit more fussy than I was expecting it to be, but I'm really happy that I cut it a single layer at a time, because it would not have turned out at all right if I tried to mirror the fabric just by folding it in half and cutting it on the fold, as it were. So that turned out, it was fussy, but it turned out. Even with Monsieur Gâteau trying to attack me and bite my hands and bite the fabric and just be a menace, it turned out. So I'm relieved. First step. That is not what I'm planning for that. So, my darlings, now what remains is to adjust the pattern in the way I wish to for the sort of hump of the bustle. And this is where the power of my seam gauge, I'm going to be using my seam gauge to increase the size of my bustle cage a little bit so that it's a bit more emphatic, because I've felt like my bustles have looked too flat when I've seen photos of them from behind. I'm always like, there's so much fabric there. It can have more loft. So I'm going to make it more lofty. This is, by the way, the seam gauge I recommend to everyone. I love them so much. I have probably got like a half dozen kicking around the workshop now. I give them to all my friends when they come over, so I just tend to have like spare ones kicking around to hand off to people. They're like under $5 from Wawak. So usually when I go and I make an order from Wawak, I add another one to my order. I think they're like £2 or something like that. They're pretty inexpensive, but they're hearty. So the metal is very strong. It doesn't bend, it isn't chintzy. It's got some solidity to it. This is the one I broke, so it's very loose here, but I broke it by throwing it into my luggage thoughtlessly. But usually they're very sturdy. They don't break easily. They are so good. Yes, Selena is right. The Wawak is great. They don't pay me to say that. I just happen to love them and think they are a wonderful company. So I rely on Wawak quite a bit. And there it is. Okay, so let's see here. So I've got some like funny bits because this comes from another sewist stash. There were some projects cut from it previously. It does not have all straight, clean edges on it, but it has been laundered. It has been pressed. That's the most important part. It is directional fabric, so there is an upside and a downside to it. I want to make certain that I have it lined up with my pattern so that the upside is pointed towards my waistband. Apparently, all of these underpinnings, for whatever reason, I managed to find lots of directional fabric for my underpinnings. Normally, I would not do that. But I love this fabric, and it's going to be a really fun set. I think Cake is pulling my fabric from the other side of the table. Hello, Cake. Hello, Monsieur Gâteau. All right. So I want the fullest possible bustle I can make myself. That's reasonable. I could go so over the top, I could really make it a sort of satire of itself. But what I'm going to do is just take it up a size. Or maybe two. Yeah, so it grades up by 3/4 of an inch between sizes. I was thinking I would do at most an additional inch on each pattern. So I think I'm going to just round it up to that inch to go up my next size. That's going to give me an additional overall length of 2 inches. So that's not very much for some things, but for a bustle, it's a lot. I'm going to make my life slightly easier here. I think, maybe. I'm going to trim off some of this excess fabric so I'm not dealing with the full length of fabric, and also fighting with my cat, who is bound and determined that he's going to pull this fabric off the table right now. So thoughtful. So I'm just going to go on the other side of my table and cut off the little bit of fabric underneath. I don't need anything from here down, so I'm just going to go ahead, cut it away. All right. Now that we are not going to be fighting with the feline quite as much, I love him, but he's feeling his oats tonight. I am using pattern weights to make my life a little easier. I'm also going to trim off this sort of weird bit here at the top. It may be a weird shape, but it's enough that I can absolutely make something with it at some point. So I'm just going to put that in my stash for later. Maybe someone needs to make a very gothic quilt. If so, you should let me know, because that's probably enough for a couple of quilt squares. All right. So this is my kind of rough and ready. I'm not going to make an entire new pattern piece for this. I'm going to take my handy dandy Choco marker and my seam gauge. I'm just going to go in and make some little hash marks for myself. I don't think you can see these at all. They are visible to me, fortunately. This is why I'm using this bright yellow, so I can see it. And once I've made those, then I connect the dots. If I need to, I can go in and use a curved ruler to make sure my shape is really nice. Especially coming through the hump here. And then as I get into the straightaway, it's much less curvy in this portion. Right, so now I have sort of traced in that edge. We're ready to get cutting. This is very rough and ready sort of adjustments. If you were going to be doing this regularly and you were like making more complicated pattern alterations, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it directly on your fabric. But if it's a sort of simple pattern with simple pattern pieces and you're making just one adjustment like that is very consistent, you can kind of get away with it, right? So like if you were doing a rectangle and you just wanted to size up your rectangle, you could just trace that on your piece of paper, your fabric. The other nice thing of having traced this in is that I can, in fact, move my fabric around like that as long as it's not woody and everything stays together, so I don't have to go around the table. We go. This is the most complicated shape in the whole pattern, but really it's a very straightforward pattern. It's pretty quick to make up. Once you've learned how to do it, there, I fell out for a minute. I apologize. And thank you, Captain Azar. Thank you. I love this fabric. I'm so happy. I got it from another sewer stash, and so I'm very excited to be using it. And as Captain Azar says, it's a good amount of fabric to be using for another project. My offcuts have been pretty good for this. I'm not being super careful about my cutting. I'm not trying to do zero waste, but I am trying to not be necessarily profligate with all of my cutting. So the stripe front panels. That was some really fussy cutting, and so I had to do some weird things with that. But with this one, I kind of tried to keep it as close to the edges as possible, to leave as much around it as possible, so that I can use that either for waistbands or other projects, or like little squares for things like quilts and things. Also pockets or reticules. Honestly, I did make Eve, our dear Eve Riot, I did make them a pair of pockets made out of this fabric. I just love it so much. So yes, it makes for a wonderful set of pockets, or even like a pair of pockets inside a garment where you want some like jazzy internal fabric that you can like show off to someone if you have just a small amount left. So that said, my darlings, the time has arrived. It's time for me to say goodnight to all of you. We got a pretty good start into this bustle cage, at least in terms of cutting the fabric, making some decisions about it, doing a quick rough and ready adjustment to the pattern, and also talking about some of the ins and outs, if you will, of bustles and bustle cages and petticoats and all of the underpinnings and things. So if you are already a subscriber on Patreon, you know that for sewing social for our underpinnings autumn, and I will be getting more into this garment on Sunday. I'll also be finishing up the ruffled petticoat on Sunday. I'm very excited. So we have a lot to look forward to. That's at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Sundays. And if you subscribe to Patreon at any level, you have access to that sewing social on Sundays. Selena, it was so wonderful seeing you again. It's been an absolute age. I've missed seeing you. I love that you were here today. I hope I will see you at some events in the future. Maybe I'll make it up to your area, but perhaps we shall meet at Costume College or something like that, because Captain Azar and I and our little coterie are all planning to go to Costume College this year, this coming year, rather, in 2026. So with that said, my darlings, please take very good care of yourselves. Remember to treasure yourselves as I treasure you. And that means staying hydrated, using the good fabric, getting your vaccines and boosters, washing your hands, giving yourself some sort of treat this evening. Do a nice thing for yourselves, my darlings, because you are irreplaceable. And if you don't take very good care, then I shall have to haunt you like an enraged cat. So please take very good care. And oh my gosh, great. Selena's going to be at Costume College this year. We'll see you there. We're going to have a wonderful, wonderful time. Have the best time at all of your events, my darlings. I will see you soon. Cheers, everyone.